So, in this supposedly annual conference, which for some obvious reasons we weren't able to hold for about 2 years, we always do a sort of a state and future kind of talk, right? And this is actually lost count. I think this is the 4th conference that we do. One of them was virtual. I tend to just forget about the existence of that one. And last year we decided to skip. It's either in person or it's not. But I'm doing this state and future talk, and that was the title every time. And it was only now, after 5 years, I realized how crazy that title is. Who cares about the state of this business? Who cares about states in the first place? What we care about is the things that happened that led to the current state. So even I make that mistake all the time. Been doing that for 5 years. So let's go back, and let's go back to the things that have happened in these past 2 years. And that's why this is such an absurdly long session of 1 hour and 15 minutes. I will not be speaking for the entire time. There will be others, fortunately, as well. But let's look at what happened in those 2 years. So this is a slide I used 2 years ago to proudly present that we were 30 people, and as a startup, that's a thing. You realize that there's 30 families, depending on the well-being of that company. And we are still a very diverse group of people with 13 nationalities at that moment residing in 7 countries. We've grown to 57 in those 2 years. We have a few extra nationalities. We counted 19. Might have lost one along the way, but it's difficult to count nationalities, especially some people have double nationality and etc. But we are located in 13 countries now as well. So that's pretty, all over the place. And those 13 countries are mainly in Europe. We have some in the US. We have somebody in Mexico, somebody in Egypt as well. So we're getting an interesting mix of people that have very different viewpoints, and that's very interesting when you have a discussion. There's always people with a different point of view. But there is definitely one passion that binds us all, right? And it's not a ring. It's food. And I really don't know what happened, if there's some subliminal messaging in our hiring process or whatsoever. But while preparing these slides, I went over to another room, and there's Henk and Dom talking. And Henk asked Dom, "How was yesterday?" Pretty normal question, right? And Dom says, "It was great. We went to this restaurant and etc., etc." And there we go again. It's the food again. Right? I don't know what happened, but there's something with food. We also have a vegetarian. And he joined us in that particular cellar, and that must have been a horrible experience. So I'm terribly, terribly sorry for putting you through it. But fortunately, given all the types of people that we have, there's one thing that really binds us all. If it's not food, it's probably the second thing, but still, we love to learn, right? And that is one of the reasons why we do this conference, is to tell you what we're doing so you can tell us if that's really stupid or smart, or you like it or you don't, right? We are here because we would really like to have your feedback on the stuff that we're doing. So please let us know. Yes, you can use the app if you prefer to stay in the shades, but you can also just engage in a conversation with anyone wearing an Axonic shirt. Now, a little bit more lightweight, I would say. We also moved to a different, headquarters. I mean, what's an office these days? Right? Who still goes to the office as the main place to work? Who still remembers, or who actually wonders if they even have an office? See, there's more of them. And we asked ourselves the same question, like, okay, we're now in 17 countries. What's the point of having an office that only the people in one of those 17 countries can even physically reach? Yet we decided to move to the center of Utrecht because it's just much nicer to be in the city center than on the outskirts. But it's also more designed as a place to just meet, right? If you want work done, stay home. If you want to meet people, come to the office, right? That's the new office. So if you feel like not getting any work done, you're always welcome in our office. If you know where the old office is, it's a 14-minute bike ride from there. Another thing that we always report on is the number of downloads, right? It's the bragging numbers, right? How many downloads do you have? Well, we've got a lot of them. And we were extremely proud that we had a cumulative number of 4.5 million downloads 2 years ago. And there's always this moment. I don't know if any of you have published an open source project to Maven Central, but you get these statistics from Maven Central. And this is where those numbers come from. But for some reason, they only update somewhere around the second week of the month for the month before. And it's not a fixed date that they become available. So we're always anxious, like, okay, every day just log in and see, are the numbers in yet, right? I think that's the most texted message from our CEO to me. Are the numbers in yet? No. But we've been growing quite substantially, and the pattern also changed. And that's interesting. There's much more ups and downs, but if you see let's say the bottom line, it's a pretty heavy trend. But we have more than 12 million downloads by now. And I have to say, occasionally, although a lot less than we used to get the question is, does anyone use it in production? And to be honest, I don't know what those 12.5 million downloads do, right? I don't know. But I think by now we can safely assume that somebody is using it in production somewhere. And we actually have proof. So that question sort of faded away slowly, but questions that fade away are always replaced by another one. And this is a question that has reached the top charts recently. Will Axon be around in 10 years? I don't know. I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen 10 years from now? The system that you're building, will that be around 10 years from now? Who knows for sure that it will be around? Lucky you. Yeah. One person. The only thing I do know is that Axon was here 10 years ago. So now I know that if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I could have said yes, but I probably didn't know. In fact, it's not completely accurate. It's 12.75 years ago. And I know that because I found in literally the archives of Google, I found the initial commit. And it was December 16th, 2009. And the third commit on that same day, and I'm pretty sure something happened before then because it's all pretty quick. I can code a little bit, but I can't do that much in one day, I'm pretty sure. And there's a very nice update there, updated Spring version to 3.0 RC3. Spring 3 came out, but wasn't yet synchronized to Maven Central. Just to give you a perspective of what time that was, this is when Spring revised their framework to make use of Java 5. Who remembers those days? Who was not happy to see generics and var args introduced? I wasn't expecting that. Maybe you're not interested. Never mind. Let's not start the generics discussion, right? We only have an hour and 15 minutes. So for those not really into Spring, that's what an iPhone looked like back in those days. And yes, All the Ladies was in the top charts of music. And I Got a Feeling, remember that one? Oh, that was your cue, right? All right, let's get back to more serious notes. Literature. So there's a couple of books that came out, and some mention Axon a bit more than others. Cloud Native Java by Josh Long has an entire chapter on CQRS and event sourcing, and that was already in 2017. Right? That was pretty old. Then there's practical microservices architectural patterns that dedicates a chapter to Axon. And then there's our, by now, our own VJ, who unfortunately was unable to join us, who wrote a book there as well. And a few months ago, I got an email from Premanand Chandrasekaran, if I pronounce that correctly. And he said, yeah, the book that I told you about is coming out. Would you like to write it forward? And I was like, the book that you told me about? Completely forgot about that. And apparently it was a 2-year journey. So that email he sent me 2 years ago was, hey, I'm going to write a book. Would you like to help me? And if you've seen the State and the Future talks of previous versions, you'll know that I will not write a book, right? I promised to not write a book. But word has reached my ear that around 2023, APRESS, don't ask me how I know, but APRESS is working on a book that is about Axon. And not because we forced APRESS to do so, but they reached out to us and asked, hey, we see this is a hot topic. Can you please write a book about it? So keep an eye out on the letterbox or wherever, and let's see what happens. Now, I don't want to just talk about the state of what we're doing, but I also want to talk a bit about the state of event sourcing in general. And event sourcing is interesting, in the British sense of the word interesting, right? It's a very hot topic. I mean, we can't deny that. There's a lot of talking about it. It's also a very powerful concept, as we saw in the keynote, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can do with it when you do it right. Unfortunately, there's also massive overcomplication and massive misunderstanding of the entire concept. And we recognize that in different shapes and forms and how people use the term event sourcing. So if there's an event or if there's asynchronous communication in general, they love to throw in the event sourcing card just to, I don't know, to pretend or to be part of it, I guess. So we found a few useful, let's call them interesting, resources. Fortunately, I was able to find all the sources so that now there's actual proof of where this comes from. So AWS, of course, if you want to do event sourcing, AWS find a way to lock you into their platform. The only thing you need to do is order, I don't know how many services, and this is just a simplified picture of it. But it can be done, right? It's okay, it can be done. It'll be a lot of fun, I assure you. This is a presentation that you can also use Kafka Streams and Kafka for event sourcing. The only thing you need to do is really take care of the fact, and that's a little bit of tuning, that there's only one event underway in that loop at the same time. And how to do that is really up to you, but you can do it, right? It'll be fine. It'll be fun, you can. Oh yeah, of course, Google has to chip in as well. So they also have a page where you can really read on. If you want to do event sourcing and you really want to lock yourself into Google, then you can do that with Google Cloud Spanner. I don't know why, but I guess that's a service that needs a bit of push. And you only need to basically implement that, then you're fine. Yeah, and there's a replayer, and make sure to do that right, because as you heard from Michiel, you don't want to do a replay of everything, right? So you probably don't get away with a single replayer. Just build a couple of them just to be sure. All right, enough sarcasm, right? But when you do it right, it doesn't have to be difficult. Or at least that's what we hope to achieve, right? To make it simpler. We want to get to the value of it without going through all that complexity and that pain that we tend to inflict on ourselves as engineers. The only thing you need to do is be event-driven, right? Not do it, not download tech stack and just install it. You don't apt-get event-drivenness, right? You are it, and it goes through all the veins. And being event-driven is not just about tools. It's about tools, techniques, and practices. Now, some of you may know us as a company for the tools that we create, but we realize, and trust us, we know that it's not just the tools. And what we've been doing lately is we've set up a solutions architecture team. And this is a team of people that have worked on well, larger and smaller event sourcing projects, and they know the pain, right? They know all the aspects in how to approach the design and how to approach the testing and how to approach all sorts of things, and they can help out. And there was a joke just waiting to happen there. But I decided not to, because in the tune of the A team, it says, if nobody else can help, and if you can find them, then maybe the A team will help. Well, this team is just always there for you. You don't have to go find them. They're just there. If you need them, just let us know, and they'll be there. And they will not maybe help. They'll just help. But we don't have the capacity or the desire, to be really honest, to help you out with every nitty-gritty detail of the project, right? We like to be on the sidelines. We like to coach. We like to help and guide you and point you at different resources that you can use. But sometimes you just want more help, right? You want people to be with you during your project. And for that, we've set up a partnership program. And there's already quite a few partners that we've onboarded to help us out in those journeys. And they come in different shapes and forms. Some of those are consulting and implementation partners. They can help out on projects. Some of them are training partners. Others are technology partners, which means that they have technology that is very much related to what we do, and we integrate everything nicely. And we've been also working on setting up our developer experience team, because in the end, it is about people finding the right resources to help them. And that resource should not always be the phone or email or whatever way you wish to communicate to us. Sometimes you just want to browse the web, put in a magic question, and end up on typically Stack Overflow to provide you with an answer that you can then copy-paste and move on with your project. So we're setting up this team to make sure that whenever you Google something, that you end up on one of the pages that has an explanation. And I'm not going to tell you all about it, but I will ask Milan to join me on stage. Milan is our head of developer experience, and he will give you a small run-through of the things that we've done in the past 2 years to make you find us.
Thank you. All right. It's just press. Yeah, technology, and you gotta think with one button. You don't know what to do with it. Experience, isn't it? That's such a nice word. I mean, it means so many things. Do you remember that experience? How many of you do you remember? Quite a few, I guess. Then you notice that at some point in time, it changed into that experience. And that's our website, by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about. And that is the new website that happened to be published in the last year, I believe. Thanks to the folks at the marketing team. So just want to give them credits, because that's the one who designed it. Most of them are sitting up there. And our designers, I saw France somewhere here. Over there. So when you meet them, congratulate them if you like the new website. The thing that I want to, but with developers, right? So website, like what's so important about a website? Well, it is important if you have a place to actually okay. Technology, yeah. Can you help me out with this? Because I feel like, I know. Yeah. All right. Hey, I was saying something about technology, right? Okay. So I was having this conversation, just a side note, while we were working here, and a colleague asked me, like, are you nervous? I'm like, I know something's going to go wrong. I just kind of have to deal with it. And yeah, I guess I was asking for it. So anyway, I was just going to shout out to our marketing team who did the website and point you to the place of it for design, especially designed for developers, and that's our developer portal. And I certainly hope you've seen it and you've been there. And one thing that we took into account when we were designing this was to start providing some experience, and I'll point back on that a little more later, about people who are relatively new to the technology. Because we've been paying a lot of attention to developers who already are familiar with the concepts, but like the getting started part wasn't really that nice. So we actually introduce the first thing, which is Start Now. And it introduces an interactive screen, an interactive platform where you could basically run a demo Axonic application, which is our gift card demo, right in your browser. You just run the Axon server in the container, and then you can just open it there, and then you can open an IDE and then just see the code in your browser, and then you can just run your application, and all that you can do without having to install anything. You can just browse a page. So that is the type of experience that we want to bring people to. The other stuff that you will find on the developer portal is obviously the information about the core concepts that everything that we do is based on, which is like domain-driven design, event sourcing, CQRS, and microservices, and you name it. And obviously, there is a page for our product. So if you want to just figure out what an Axon framework is or what an Axon server is, you just go to the right place. And then we have the blogs. So once in a while, we actually write down some interesting things. You can see the latest articles by some of my colleagues, and those are in those pages. They're also tags, so if you look into the page for a specific product or technology, you can see the blogs that are related to that particular technology or that particular product. But it's not only blogs, we also have videos. So one thing that we realize is we do a lot of these talks, we do conferences, we do all kinds of things, and unless you know where to find those, it's really hard. You just have to know which is the YouTube channel or count on Google to find it for you. So we put it all together. You can filter by year, by language, by what technology it refers to, and whatnot. What I really want you to notice here is the community tab. So if you go to the community tab, you will see videos that are not recorded by any of the Axon employees. Those are not by us. Those are videos, tutorials, presentations by community members, by people like you who have done a project, who know something, and they decided to share it with the world. And the reason I'm showing you this is to encourage you to do this. If you have a resource that you have published, whether that's a video or a blog or something, reach out. Tell us about it. We'll put it here. We'll make sure that the world knows about your experience. So at the end of the day, it's helping each other. That's what a community is. That's what developer experience that we want to have is. We don't just want to be the ones going on the stage telling you how to do things. We really want to build up a community of people that are helping each other achieve better results, right? So if there is anything you want to share, do not hesitate. But learning, it's more than just blogs and tutorials and videos. It requires you to sometimes to have a structured approach, and that's one other thing that we worked on. It's called Axonic Academy, and for some reason this guy always pops up on every picture. I don't know why. But yeah, it's called Axonic Academy, and it's a specially designed e-learning platform to learn everything about the core concepts, but also the products. It currently has 2 free courses, and we're working on more courses which are not free. Okay, click more. So if you haven't seen it yet, please do. And then if you wanna, you can just purchase the rest or reach out for some sort of partnership deal or whatever, that our sales team will be happy to talk about that with you. But we have these bundles. So you can either purchase a bundle that is mostly towards Axon Framework, another one that's mostly towards Axon Server, or a bundle that contains all the courses. The thing is, we're still working on the courses. Not all of them are ready. So good news about, that's the bad news. The good news is, while we are working on this, you get a 50% discount of all those prices. So it's really an opportunity to buy early if you really want to learn. This is how it looks like for those of you who haven't seen it. It's pretty much video tutorials. Those are typically provided by one of the lead engineers, like Steven is doing a lot of these courses for the Axon framework, and Bert is doing some for the Axon server. So it's not a random people who know things. It's the people that actually work on the product that try to teach you how to use them. And we have exams, so we actually can give you a certificate at the end of the day that you've completed the course, passed the exam. So yeah, so you can brag about it. You can be a certified Axonic developer. No, just kidding. Just to give you a little bit of a stats, so those are how, like we do have about 2,000 students on the introduction course, and about 1,000 on the CQRS and event sourcing course, and more coming on the other courses. And so this is pretty much what I covered. This is actually what you see is from a survey that Stack Overflow did about what are the most important resources for people when they learn to be software developers. So we covered a lot of those. We keep working on making more things more accessible, more easy to find, better quality, and all those like blogs, how-tos, and whatnot. But the #1 resource for developers to learn is technical documentation. And when we say technical documentation, you probably know that well, right? Now, that is actually what we refer to as so many different names. It's the reference docs, it's the official docs, it's the tutorials, it's pretty much everything. And as much as it provides a lot of information, and I know a lot of you are using it heavily, we're not really happy with just having one thing to serve all the purposes, especially because it does not differentiate between people who are just starting and want to know the basics versus people who already been using the technology and they have hard questions and need to quickly find answers. So there's quite a lot of room to improve this. And we are actually currently working on a new approach for documentation. And that's just a prototype that we currently have. It may look different when it's ready. But if you meet Mohammed, who should be somewhere here in the room upstairs, he would be more than happy to. He is our come on, help me out here. The guy who is actually dealing with the learning experience designer. That's the title. Here you go. So he is our learning experience designer. So he knows a lot about how people learn and how to design system that help people to learn. He would be more than happy to talk to you and see what is it that you're missing, how is your learning process look like, what more we can do to actually help you with better resources. So that was about the technical documentation, and on that list there's also another important part that I would like to highlight, and that's the online communication platform, and we do have one. How many of you have accounts on the Discuss platform? That's about half of you, so the rest of you have a homework to do. So please do, and it's not because I don't even know if I have some statistics or not, but that's not about the point. The thing is, we really, as Allard mentioned earlier, we want you to help. We want to help you a lot, but it's a limited capacity. And that platform is a place where we can interact. We all can interact. We all can help each other. All the questions are stored there. They're searchable later on and whatnot. And this is some quick statistics. So this is since we started 2 years ago, how many signups we have, and the number of topics, and the number of page views. So as you can see, it's growing. So it's really nice if you join and be active there and ask your questions, but also help other developers there. They would much appreciate it. And one thing that we're thinking of is actually using that, and not only that platform, to provide some sort of recognition. So you can see, we already track things like how often people use, or nice things they share, or for example, appreciation for posts and things like that. Yeah, please be active online. So we talk a lot about all the online stuff, right? Do this online, do that online, but that's not everything we do in the developer experience team. We actually do other things, like we go to events and do presentations and talks, and we talk to people, and we try to get the feedback of the people who are using or looking to use these types of technologies into what should we implement, how we should do things. Last night we were going through the slides, and we realized there are marks missing on that map, because we've done more than what actually I'm showing you here, but didn't have time to update it. So it's been quite of a intense period of time for going to different events. So if you know of an event in your area or someplace that we should be let us know, and we'll investigate. One thing that we did that's not on the map is what we call the Spain Jug Tour this year, and I think David is also somewhere here in the room. Oh, here you go with the camera. He was kind of the mastermind behind that. So we managed to go to several Java user groups in Spain and do talks and have actually very nice conversations with those folks. And we're open to do more of those. Just reach out, tell us what your needs are, and let's discuss. The reason we do this is not only promotional, but also, as I said, it gives us the opportunity to have a conversation like we hope to have with you here these days. That sparkles new ideas, that gives us insights about how do you use things, what do you use, why, and what you would want to see. And this results in things in the actual products. So you may have noticed that in the last couple of years, the things that have appeared are the Axon Bomb, or for Axon Initializer, or the recently added support for the Jakarta namespaces. Those were things that came out of the community. People had a need for those, and we did implement them. And we are working or thinking or experimenting with other things that are also coming from the community, like a CDA support or support for Quarkus or Micronaut or whatever else new frameworks and technologies are there. So that's pretty much all driven by your interest in the product. And we are seriously considering this, so I want to encourage you one more time, talk to us, involve in a conversation, tell us what you think, and we'll consider it. And then it will make it in the product occasionally, but more on that, I guess, Allard and others will tell. Thank you.
I'll take that. Right, thank you, Milan. So that brings us to the product. So what did we actually do in that product, and what did actually change in that, besides those few things that we got from the community? And there's been some learning in our environment as well. So historically, we started off with building Axon framework actually as an experiment, just to play around with CQRS and event sourcing, but it led to simplify that, right? It turned into a framework that allowed people to use CQRS and ES, event sourcing. But then we noticed, okay, there's a couple of challenges using CQRS and event sourcing at scale. So how can we improve the framework to help getting people ready to scale, right? And then helping people to actually scale. So that's when we started building a dedicated event store. So just technology that is designed to store events and masses of them, right? And not have any performance issues while doing so. And then we noticed, hey, there's commands and queries going around as well. So we need a way to route those messages better. So we started building a message routing system because we were not quite satisfied with the existing, typically queue-based systems that were out there. And later on, we learned about those two separate products and how they were not quite easy to use, and we merged them together as Axon Server in 2019. But the whole history is about Axon Framework first, and then Axon Server coming out as a way to solve specific problems that people running Axon Framework have. And there's a few things we've learned. And one of them, and the most important, I guess, is the benefits of location transparency. The fact that you have this messaging, what we call explicit messaging, these commands and events and queries, allows you to just build a big monolith and turn it into microservices whenever you need to. So we don't have to overcomplicate our architecture at day one, but we can do that any day we like. So whenever you feel like overcomplicating your architecture, you can do so tomorrow. That's fine. But more importantly, the benefits of location transparency, obviously this is something we knew, but we're starting to act on it more explicitly, are beyond the JVM. Who is not a Java developer here? Who? That's the guy that sat in the plane for 23 hours. Just to show up here to find out that everything is about a Java-based framework. Yeah. Anyway, you'll be fine. So one thing that we'll be doing very soon, or as of the next release actually, is you'll see that the roadmaps of Axon Framework and Axon Server will diverge somewhat. Right? They will still be connected. Obviously, we don't live in two separate worlds, right? Those products live in the same world, but they will focus on different problems, where Axon Framework is much more focused on developer problems and less about the messaging and the operational things. We have Axon Server to focus more on the messaging and the event storage. So we'll change the release cadence of those two products as well as a result of that. But more details a bit later on. Well, since we had a designer and he was done with the website, we thought, hey, let's do our logos as well. So we have a couple of new logos for the products. If you want to know all the reasoning behind the logos and what the symbols mean, you can ask our designer, and you'll be well. There's a long story behind it. But let's focus on framework for now. So let's get some fun facts out. And the fun thing about Axon Framework is that it's open source, so you can find all these tools that gather interesting information about your Git history and who's been doing what. So you can run those as well. You can find out. You can actually validate them. Maybe I completely miscounted some of those facts. But the first commit was 4,663 days ago. That's 12 years and 9 months. That was quite a long time ago for software, right? Fortunately, the framework now doesn't really look anything like it was in 2009. It currently has 228,522 lines of code. To be honest, I don't know what counts as a line of code, if an empty line is also counted as documentation. Anyway, 128,000 of those are in production. And then I stumbled upon an interesting document, and you do need to peek at the exact name. Carnegie Mellon University's Scilab of Sustainable Computing Consortium did research, and they found that commercial software has 20 to 30 bugs for every 1,000 lines of code. So I took a napkin, and I'm not extremely good in math, but I can do some of it. So I figured then we should have around 2,500 to close to 4,000 bugs, right? I mean, it's the truth. It's on the internet. GitHub told us that we've closed 949 of them. I didn't really check. They were all issues. I didn't check if we actually fixed them or whatsoever, but it's give and take, right? It's a napkin calculation, right? So that means there is about 1,600 to close to 3,000 left. Did we say we need your help? Now, the good thing is this is about commercial software. Our software is not commercial, so those rules don't apply. Whew, we managed to get away with it. It's open source, so if you find a bug, you can fix it. Right? Or, well, we will. Well, the good news is we also increased the team. So the core team for a long time was, there it is. We've managed to increase that team, so it's now 5 people, of 3 are dedicated to Axon Framework, and 2 of them spend a significant amount of their time on it. But more importantly, the actual team, the real team, is you guys. There's more than 200 contributors that have contributed to Axon Framework in the history of the framework. And it's really sad for those 50, but over 150 of them still have the current code ownership, quote unquote. They are still blamable, according to Git, for certain lines of code in the head. I think that's pretty interesting. So let's play that Git blame game. And I thought, okay, let's get some statistics, right? Who owns, quote unquote? Who is blamable for any lines of code? And well, since Stephen has been working on most of this stuff, he is really on his way to own it. But he's not there yet. So according to this count, there are still 74,000 lines of code on my name. So any of those 20 to 30 bugs per 1,000 lines of code are on me. And Stephen is really, really getting close. The new features barely made it. He did do a commit yesterday, and I'm pretty sure he did it on purpose, just to get a few extra lines of... He just changed some stuff that I changed. Anyway. So there's a little battle going on in the office, right, about owning, anyway. But that's not really important, right? It's just what happens at the office stays at the office. What we really care about is there's also a lot of owners that, well, own code, 150 of them. And I want to put 3 in the spotlight. And I did not check the attendee list or the registration list, but there's some, actually, one of those might be here. So if you're here, just make noise. So on to number 3, Johannes. No? Too bad. Tim to Bake. That's not too far away. That sounds pretty local. You here by any chance? No? Too bad. Elin, Alexei, any? Ah, too bad. Well, we could give it a shot. But even though they're not here, I think we can. They can hear us when we give them a little round of applause. Now, contributing to open source can be fun. What Elin did was not fun. He migrated all the unit tests from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5. Exactly. That's. I wonder if he's still okay. Anyway, our thoughts are with you, man. Come on, hang on. Anyway, so that's all community. But I am curious what Stephen has been up to capture all of these lines of code from me, and maybe he can shed a bit of light on what happened. So Stephen, please join me.
Can you all hear me? Is this working? Nice. So yeah, well, I'll catch up to you. You know, I want to own this. I want to be the one to get the blame to fix all the things, and then ask you to contribute and try fixing some of those bugs, because that's, I don't know, I really enjoy that communication between you all. So we haven't done the conference last year, so they didn't have the chance to talk about 4.5. So let's do that right now as well. What we have been introducing in Axon Framework 4.5.0. So we got a list, of course, and first of those is the bill of materials. So the thing that Milan already shared, it came from the community. There was a necessity to combine framework with all the extensions we have out there and to use working versions with one another. So this is where the bill of material comes in. And I highly recommend you start using that because it will just simplify your life out there. Secondly, we introduced a relatively small feature, but I think it's a very handy one, snapshot filters. So if you would be in the database space to store your snapshots, you could simply remove those, but you might not want to remove those. You want to keep those in there. But what happens if you have a new version of your snapshot, of the aggregate, for example? Then you have the old ones that you don't want to use. You want to have those new ones in place. This is where those snapshot filters come in, but you, in all honesty, don't really have to configure those. They will be set automatically for you. And if you use the revision annotation on your aggregate, for example, it will automatically filter out the other ones that don't comply with what you have in that annotation. Again, a simplification for all of you. So, thirdly, a massive one, which was a burden I was carrying for quite some time, was the Kafka extension. We already had this in Axon 3, but it was really in a milestone state. We did move it towards Axon 4 once we released that, but it has been in a milestone state from Axon 4 to 4.5. I knew there were people using it in production, but we weren't overly, well, comfortable with it just yet. And that's one of the major things we did there as well. So I can comfortably say that you can start using that as well if you have Kafka in your sphere and you want to connect it to your Axon Framework application. And lastly, this was the biggest introduction we did in 4.5, and that is called the pooled streaming event processor. And I have a bit more on event processors to share about. So when you're thinking about the event consumption, the event processing within the framework, event handling components are the things you would write. These are your classes containing the @event handler annotated methods in them, and these have the logic you need to do when it comes to handling events. In most cases, that is a projector, but it might be something entirely different, hence why it's just an event handling component here. Underneath there, we have a thing we call the processing group. The processing group gives you a means to define other configuration needs when it comes to error handling or how you want to order your events if you're parallelizing streams. A processing group can be in charge of 1 to n number of event handling components, depending on the non-functional requirements you have. And then we have another layer. This is where we enter the sphere of this new feature. This is where the event processor comes in, which allows us to do the parallelization, which allows us to do the things like a replay, all the hefty benefits. And this is, well, the heavy bit about the pooled streaming event processor, what I'm going to talk about. So one of the things we did is we had a layer underneath. So we had 2 implementations already, a subscribing one and a tracking event processor. And the tracking event processor really was doing a means of streaming the events to itself, to handle those, to give those to your event handling components. So let's first start off with what this tracking event processor does. It is the default streaming processor, because it was the first one out there. But more importantly, it uses a thread factory internally with a configurable amount of threads. So you configure that, and when you start up your application, that's it. That's the fixed amount of threads you have. If you want to change that, you shut it down, you fix the number to whatever you need at that moment. Okay? Suits the needs. What do these threads do? Each of these threads will open a stream with your event store to get those events out of there. These threads will also, once they have a stream open, will process events per the segments you have. So the partitioning of your store, of your stream in those separate sequences. So each thread is owning a single of these segments and reading on its own accord based through one of those streams it opens. Pool streaming event processor does this a bit different. It has 2 thread pools, which you can configure in a more easier fashion, and you could share those if you want within that pool streaming event processor, but more importantly actually, between every instance of pool streaming event processor. So that if you have an application which is very heavy on handling events, you could, well, optimize by using a single executor for a certain set of those processors, optimizing a little bit over there. Internally, these thread pools, well, have different purposes. The first one is there to open a single event stream. So it will always open a single event stream, and that is it. And it will use that event stream to read the events and to coordinate the activities towards those workers it has underneath. The workers are in the second thread pool, and those workers reflect the different sequences you have, the different segments you've partitioned your stream in. So the second thread pool with our workers executing all that unclaimed work, and well, this is where you handle the events. This gives us certain pros and cons, where the pros are that, well, we can easily share those thread pools, simplifying your life to some extent. We only have a single stream open. That's definitely going to save on I/O. I think that's a good one. We definitely seen some issues with just using the tracking event processor. You have 10 or 20 of those. It could be problematic. Solved by the pool streaming event processor. And more importantly, actually, there's no limitation on that one thread owning a single segment. This was the limitation of you being able to easily scale up or down, which is, well, gone in this case. The only con we have really is that the progress is limited to the fastest segment within that group, because the other ones, well, there's just a single stream. Enough about full streaming event processor. Let's go to 4.6. Because, well, in 4.6, we've done a ton of things. Really done a ton of things. And, well, I'm definitely not going to talk about everything because that's just too much out there. Nice bit about the contributions. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these points out here as well. So firstly, the Kotlin extension is no longer experimental. It's fully out there, so you can start using it. Secondly, yes, Jan, I understand. You're happy with that. Milan already shared this as well. We have now introduced the means that you can use Jakarta as well in your namespace to simplify your life if you're in Java EE, or enable us to do CDI extension things like Milan was pointing out. We've got streaming queries, which you might already seen on the pages as well. We've got a multi-tenancy extension out there that you can simplify setting your application up for any number of tenants you have. Integrated tracing and, well, Spring Native extension as well to speed up your startup of your application. But more importantly, really the heavyweight that made it took so long with all those things in it is the dead letter queue. So let me run you through the dead letter queue real quick. I see you really quick. So again, we're on the event handling processing, event process bit. The dead letter queue comes in when it's about processing groups. So it's the specificity of the processing group. Let's go through a regular process. We have an event processor group, and our event handling component, updating events or updating the projections. Let's start handling events. So things are happy, the events are flowing, we're updating our model, but all of a sudden, there's something wrong with the 5th event. Maybe the schema in there is not something you like, or your store is out of order, you can't really reach it anymore. What happens in a regular process is that an exception would be thrown to the processing group, and likely thrown to the event processor, meaning that you're stuck at this one event. You as a developer need to do something to fix this. And that's not really helpful, right? This is where our dead letter queue comes in. And the dead letter queue, if you set it up for your event processors, adjusts this processing group into a dead lettering processing group using a dead letter queue in the next. Let's do the same exercise. We have our events, they're flowing through, everything is going nicely. We reach event 5 again, and there's something going wrong here. Instead of bubbling up the exception, the dead lettering processing group catches it and stores it in the dead letter queue for you to process it at a later stage. All fine, we thus proceed. We're no longer stuck. Go to the following event and we handle it. But there's something specific about this. So what you can do with your processing groups is decide the ordering of your events when you're parallelizing it. That sequence of those events is very important. So if event D1 fails, we want event D2, which rightfully needs to come after that and expects the previous one to be handled. You don't want that to happen either. So you want that to be stored in the dead letter queue as well. But that's what it does. So it is essentially a dead letter queue of sequences in there. Okay? And if you want to trigger it, well, you can trigger it to handle it again, and you just tell the dead lettering queue to handle those events for you. So I already saw I should have been faster, so let me move on to the streaming queries. With the streaming queries, I'm not going to steal all the thunder because I know my colleagues are going to talk about this as well. I'm just going to talk about the start point, which we are, and the end point. If you're dispatching a streaming query, you'd again use the query gateway. You see you get a publisher back from your active streaming interface, and you can make that into a flux automatically. From the handling side, that means you could just return a flux, and that'll work. Very nice. We'll see in a bit how that's going to work. Thirdly, integrated tracing. You might be aware that we have another extension, the tracing extension, working based on the open tracing paradigm. That's, however, a bit, they're moving away from that. They don't want to use it anymore, and in favor, they're moved to OpenTelemetry. So we've been thinking, will we just add an OpenTelemetry extension? And we figured, no, it really belongs inside the framework. You want to be able to monitor more than just on the interceptors. You want to be able to monitor how long it takes to load my aggregate, or how long it takes to create a snapshot, or to load my Saga. All those things are now in place with that integrated tracing, where you can do logging if you like, or based on OpenTelemetry, requiring some setup, but giving you a nice trace throughout your system, so that you can better optimize it. This is my last one, the experimental Spring Native extension. Sounds dangerous, but Spring Native is still experimental itself as well, hence why we are too. Allows you to combine Spring Native with Axon Framework so that you can use something like GraalVM to quickly start up your application. And what we're doing there internally really is registering all your message handling components. So your aggregates, your projectors, where you have your query handlers in there, because we're doing some reflective stuff. That's what the framework does. So we need to have those native hints in place so that it's going to work. So we do that for you. But secondly, we also do the things that we do reflective actions on, like our annotations, our serializable objects, and the things we do with our service loader. So I think I've already extended my time. My apologies. But still, I still got more. What's going to come in 4.7? Well, it might be interesting to talk about 4.7. But in all honesty, I think it's more interesting to talk about something else, about Axon 5. I truly think, or we truly think, that it is time to move over to a new major version of the framework. So I can gladly say that the planning phases have started already, a bit before 4.6 actually, and we're going to heavily invest in this. And we're thinking about some topics that we're thinking about is moving towards JDK 17, because Axon 4 is still based on JDK 8. Another one is using reactive APIs throughout the entirety of the Axon framework, which I think is going to be a nice benefit for all of you. We want to change a bit about the configuration so that you're not necessarily tied to always using annotations, because that might enable us more nicer things with Quarkus and Micronaut, for example. Fourthly, serialization native messages. You can dive into this. I'm not gonna, because there are still a ton of things. And this is not necessarily the important bit. The important bit is that I want your opinion. I want to hear what you need in Axon 5, what you think is beneficial. For that, we got in the foyer, we got a flip over. You can write things and definitely approach me or other teammates if you want to talk about what needs to change. So, extended my stay. Here you go.
Thank you. Yeah, we're used to time slots of 40 to 45 minutes, so this is a completely new experience for us as well. So let's see how far within today we can stay. Anyway, I'll keep it very brief. So last year or 2 years ago, we announced the availability of Axonic Cloud, which is basically the cloud offering of Axon Server. So we had an option with shared clusters, and they were cost effective. You could launch, et cetera, et cetera. But they were also on shared devices, so you really don't know how it's going to use the CPU for anyone else, right? If you have noisy neighbors, then they might impact your throughput. So what we've introduced is the possibility for private clusters. You can go to the console, and you can just click, hey, I want to have a cluster. Where do you want it? You can geographically, well, you can choose the geography where you would like to have it. If there's any options there that you miss, we can help set up custom clusters. We have a couple of customers that had very specific needs on data that had to be replicated to specific countries, and definitely not specific other countries. That's fine. We can help you design that. But more importantly, we've noticed that the applications run at the client side or in their cloud, typically. And we had the cluster running and the support teams and the monitoring done on our side. What we really want to be doing is move, I'm trying to go too fast now. There's a bit of challenge there that there's legal and privacy restrictions, security restrictions that don't always allow you to have your data managed by us. I mean, you can trust us, but they don't for some reason. They're born to not trust people. So what we want to do is move that cluster to your own cloud and then find a way to manage it for you, right? And there's various ways, and it is done in certain enterprises. But we find out it's still tricky, as those same two people that you saw on the earlier slide, they still have a big say in this. And this is where we really would like to have your feedback, right? If you want us to manage it, what does that mean to you? But let's move on. That will be coming to a cloud near you, whatever, blah, blah. Great. The more important thing is Axon Server itself. And actually, I'm moving way too fast. I would like to invite Mark, Sarah, and Milan on stage. Those are the core engineers that have worked very hard on the Well, I guess they know the byte array and the byte buffer and the map byte buffer better than anyone else, at least in the company. So I'd like to give it to you and give us a bit of an update.
So I hope you can hear me. Good. Okay, so a little bit about Axon Server, this part. So what have we been up to in the last 2 years? So we've seen in 2021, we've seen version 4.5, sorry. And last year we've released, or this year we've released 4.6. We'll be talking about what is in there in a minute. And what's planned for next year is a new version, which is called 2023.0. So as Allard was already mentioning, a new versioning scheme. So we have different version numbers. But it's not just 2023.0, it will also be .1 and .2. So no longer one release per year, but we'll plan to have 3 releases per year, each year. A little more about that. So as I was already saying, we're no longer keeping the same version numbers for Axon Framework and Axon Server. We see Axon Server more as a standalone product that can also be used without Axon Framework. Therefore, it makes sense to have a different version number, and altogether it's a different kind of beast. So we introduced these new version numbers. I already mentioned 3 releases per year. Roughly every 4 months there will be a new release. The first 2 releases in the year are more focused on new features, introducing new features to the product. Some of these features may be introduced as preview features, so we can already get some feedback from you. And they may be behind feature toggles, and you can switch them on and off. And then the final release of the year will be a long-term support release, so that will be updated with security features or security fixes for a number of years to come. Okay, back to Axon Server 4.5. Some time ago already, so I was thinking back, okay, what did we do in 4.5? First thing we introduced there was options to have external authentication and authorizations. So not just logging into the dashboard through the users you define in Axon Server, but you can use Google users, or you can use LDAP or Active Directory to log into Axon Server dashboard. And if you use the LDAP or the Active Directory option, you can also use that for authorizations within the dashboard. We did some updates in the dashboard. You're now able to search snapshots, and there's a nice blinking icon if there's a new version available that you can see. And we introduced plugins. Plugins, a little bit more about those. These are OCI bundles, so basically there are jars that you can upload to Axon Server. They run in an isolated environment, so they don't influence the Axon Server code too much. Inside the bundle, you can define a number of services, which are interceptors in the message flows. So if you have a message going through Axon Server, there are some points that you can add your own code. What's important to know in a multi-context environment is that you can start them and you can configure them on a per context level. So you can have them active for one context, but not for another context. You can have different configurations per context. And it's also interesting to know that you can start them or you can stop them without having to start Axon Server. A small example for that. So we have the command flow application sending a command through Axon Server to a command handler. And of course the response going back. And you can have interceptors when a command reaches Axon Server, and you can have the interceptor when the response goes back to the requester. So what can you do with that? Some examples. It will not be the complete list. It's up to you, of course, what you want to do in that, but you can do some things like schema validation. If you have a command, does the request apply to the schema? With tracing, Steven already talked about tracing options in framework. You can also put some trace points in the interceptors, and that will give you a more end-to-end view. And you could also use it for things like a fine-grained access control. So with the requests that you get, you can also get the context of the connected user or connected application. So you can say, okay, this command is allowed for this user or not. Similarly, for events, when we publish events or when we read events, there are also interceptors that you can have executing some code. Again, you can do some schema invest. Can do some. My screen's coming black. Okay, sorry, little distraction here. So you can do some encryption there. Okay, so you can do encryption there. You can encrypt messages. You can do compression if you have large events. For instance, you could do encryption, compression there. And you can also do some kind of things like upcasting of events when you read them. Which is a nice cue for me to hand over to Sarah.
Thank you, Mark. So let's continue by introducing the new feature in Axon Server 4.6. So the main topic in Axon Server 4.6 are the introduction of admin API. Admin API are useful to support the maintenance of the configuration of the cluster and the maintenance of distributed event processors. Also, we improved the support for large messages, and we improved performance even more. And the graphical UI has been repainted. So let's start by analyzing in a little more detail the more remarkable features. So the admin API. Let's start with the admin API. Okay, great. Thank you. So before version 4.6, you could use 3 tools to configure your cluster. The Axon Server CLI, mainly useful when you need to configure with scripts the cluster. The Axon Server Dashboard, when the user wants to change it manually. And the REST APIs. Now, starting with Axon Server 4.6, you have 2 additional methods that are the gRPC API, and you can configure it programmatically through Axon Server Java connector. So what can we do with these new APIs? First of all, you can use the admin API to handle the replication groups and the context defined within them. Also, you can handle the privileges, the access privileges, defining application and user and assigning them roles. Also, you can handle event processors, simplifying their maintenance, particularly if they are distributed. So, indeed, the one typical use case for the usage of admin API is to reset a distributed event processor. You can, in general, more general, use admin API for all the operations that requires a temporary suspension of an event processor. For example, you can automate a release process requiring to pause an event processor for running a migration script. Another use case the admin API are particularly suitable for is multi-tenancy. You can use admin API to dynamically create context assigned to tenants. And also, you can use admin API to implement your own on-premise SaaS platform, supporting the dynamic creation of replication groups, context, applications, and users. So let's see how admin API can, for example, help us to reset a distributed event processor. So let's suppose that we have a component that declares a distributed event processor with 6 segments, and the component is distributed through 3 instances. Each instance claims some of the segments. And when at a certain point we need to reset the distributed event processor, what happened? Before Axon Server 4.6, the instance responsible for performing the reset had to stop, to pause the event processor, releasing the token it claimed, and reset the tokens. Since the event processor, in this case, is distributed, this is not possible because we had the other token still claimed by the other instance of the same component. So with Axon Server 4.6 using admin API, it is now possible to ask Axon Server to pause the distributed event processor. Axon Server dispatches the request to all involved instances, causing all the tokens to be released. And at this point, it is possible to reset the tokens and to ask Axon Server to restart all the instances through a new invocation of admin API. Admin API can also support multi-tenant application. Let's assume we have an application that's able to serve multiple tenants, each of which is associated with a specific context. So what we can do is to subscribe to all updates related to context in Axon Server. In this way, when any user decides, for example, through Axon Server dashboard, to create a new context for a new tenant, the component can react accordingly, for example, activating the services for this new tenant. But not only that, we can also implement a back office component that is capable of creating dynamically this context whenever is needed. Let's change the subject now, moving to large message support. So we have here 2 main changes. The first one applies to large event transactions. So when we have a particular large transactions, before Axon Server 4.6, we have a 32K events per transaction limit. Now this limit has been removed. Also, Axon Server 4.6 simplifies the configuration for a large event transaction in terms of message size. But is the second change the most interesting one? Steven already introduced it. So you already know that Axon ecosystem already supported 3 types of queries: direct query, the scatter-gather query, and the subscription query. And with Axon 4.6 framework and server, we introduced the streaming query. So the streaming query has been created to simplify all the situation when a direct query does not return a single result, but a collection of results, potentially a very large collection. So using direct query, it would be necessary to load in memory all the result sets on the producer side and to send it back to the requester through a single message passing through Axon Server nodes. Now, with using streaming query, it is, if, of course, the result consists of a collection of elements, it will be possible to send the elements one by one through a stream back to the requester. In this way, avoiding loading all the results set in memory and supporting the transmission of heavy messages. So streaming query implements back pressure mechanism through the entire pipeline. And of course, to use the streaming query, not only Axon Server, but also both consumer and producer need to be updated to 4.6 version. So now that you have an insight about 4.6, let me introduce you to Milan, my colleague, to talk about the future.
Okay. Okay, so let's see what we can do in 0 minutes. I guess this is what happens when you mix developers and estimates. So I'm just going quickly to walk you through new features that we are introducing right now at this moment. We also have some of them in the preview. So we also heard during the keynote that people want to modify events, and we got that asked a lot. So what we decided to do is to build a time machine. Well, I wish we wanted to do that, but Allard said we don't have budget for that. So instead of that, we decided to build an event transformation feature. So basically a feature that gives you a possibility to go back in time and modify your events, and you can also delete those events. So this is pretty cool thing. I'm talking about events here, but in future we can also do snapshots as well. Not currently present, but it will be. This is a feature that you might think as on a SQL update, but it should not be used as a SQL update. It is something that is really lengthy and really complex under the hood, and it should not be used that often. So let's see cases when to use it. One of the very common use case for it is security. You have some events laying out on a hard drive, and you want to make them secure. They were in plain text. You would use event transformation feature to go and encrypt them. One of the subcases of this use case is to use it for a GDPR. Pretty simple, right? Also, one of the really useful use cases is when you have a lot of appcasters and the maintenance of those appcasters became too expensive, or they're just not too maintainable. So you want to replace them by basically changing the schema of your events. And the last thing is to compact your event store. There is an aggregate. You know that it will not be used anytime soon or ever. So it is, as we say, archived. So we want to go and delete all events published by that aggregate, and Axon Server will also do a compaction of the event store for us. But there are also use cases when not to use it. The very first is to replace an appcaster. So this is something that's a little bit contradictory, right? So whenever you want to change something, if it is really simple, write an appcaster. If it is a complex transformation, then use an event transformation. Also measure the time needed for those appcasters to run. Do not use this feature to fix a bug, write an appcaster. Do not use this feature to avoid update events. So if I have, for example, order created event and now the quantity changed, do not transform your order created event for this purpose, but write an update event and publish it. Use event sourcing properly. So that was all how this feature, when to use it and when not. Let's now see how it works, but I'm really quickly going to go over it. So we here have some segments. We want to start a transformation. There are two types of actions. We can replace or delete an event. We are going to basically fill transformation segments with these actions. So we're going to say, okay, I want to modify event 0. I want to delete event 3. Once I'm done with my transformation, I might start applying it. So on applying, we'll basically firstly shrink the current segment. We'll stop it, open a new one. So we can, in parallel, also write append events to our event store, and we can do a transformation. Then we will just create a new version of our segments. Axon Server will always use the latest version of a segment to read events. And then we are just going to combine original segment and the transformation action. So basically, event 0 is modified, 1 and 2 are exactly the same, 3 has been removed, etc., etc. Voila, your transformation is here. You transformed your event store. Now, let's move to one other feature that you are also having in somewhat preview phase. That is tiering the storage. Here we have one Axon Server node. It has 2 tiers. Tier 1 is put usually on fast SSD drives. Tier 2 is maybe in cloud, maybe on some slow hard drives. And then when we want to append events to our event store, we are firstly going to append them to tier 1. And then due to time limits or size limits, we might decide to move events from one tier to the other, saving basically costs. Now we need to combine those tiers in order to have the complete picture of the stream. And we can also just continue adding events to tier 1. Right? The rationale behind this is that probably we are going to use the most recent data, and we are probably going to access the tier 1 much frequently than tier 2. And the very last thing, I promise, is the event retention. So there are contexts such as integration context, for example, in which you want to have a time limit for your events. You want your events to disappear because you have no purpose of it. They are not used for event sourcing, but mostly for synchronization between several contexts. And this is what this feature is for. And with this, I'm done.
How much time do we have left? No, sorry. Terribly sorry. This is a very complex play to get different people to get their say on a stage without breaks in between. There's one more thing that I would like to talk about. And that I mentioned it earlier. Axon has been focusing on the JVM for quite a while. And we wanted to break out of that space because our friend here spent... give him a reason to spend 23 hours in a plane. Anyway. So what we've been working on, and what we are still working on, is we've created a connector for pure Java, so that even if you're not using the framework, you can still use Axon Server. And we're working on a .NET connector, right? And then the Python and PHP and all those are next somewhere down the line. So that approach would help us to basically give an okay to all sorts of Java-based frameworks. It would, in time, make it possible to also serve other platforms which are non-JVM. But then we realized that lambdas and Google Cloud Functions and all those beautiful, scale to zero type of components, we have a bit of a problem there. There's nothing we can do to make them suddenly become alive simply by the presence of an event somewhere else, right? So we have this bit of a tricky situation. And besides that, messaging is very challenging. Messaging is annoying, but we have to deal with it. It's complex. And we really like to have a framework or a means in place to take much of that complexity away from you, as much as we can, right? Because we love that complexity and we have the people that want to focus on that. So we wondered, okay, how does nature solve this type of messaging problem? Right? How does nature do messaging at scale? And we found a little thing in our body called an axon. And the little thing called axon in our body transports messages and is really good at messaging. And it knows about different types of messages. So good so far. And it has a terminal. Well, the concept of a terminal is kind of, well, we've done that in the past. But there's a thing called a neurotransmitter, and there's a synaptic vesicle, whatever that is. There's a synapse. And we thought, that's what we need. We just need to build what nature has built for us and just put that into a computer. That's why we have Axon Synapse. And I realize that there's a lot of people from Germany here, and this is, in German, is pronounced Synapse, which very much sounds like Schnaps, which is not what we mean. We'll have those later in the evening, right? For now, we'll have to deal with this. So how does this work? Well, actually, Axon Synapse sits between Axon Server and anything you would have on the right, including Cloud Functions or scale to zero applications in any way. And it will speak the gRPC language, which is a very well-performing kind of API towards Axon Server. And it will just communicate in HTTP for now to all of the clients. And as you can see, most of the arrows are to the right, but there are some that go to the left. That's done on purpose, because you can send commands by just calling an HTTP endpoint on the Synapse. But if there is a subscription and you want to have something invoked, you can invoke it to the right. And what Axon Synapse will take care of is quite a bit of things. First of all, obviously, the protocol translation, right? gRPC doesn't always fit on HTTP, one. It will take care of concurrency control. So all the features and the benefits you have with Axon, where you can concurrently process certain events, but then sequentially process others, that will be part of that as well. It will make sure that there is only one concurrent HTTP call ongoing for things that need to be executed sequentially. It will take care of flow control. It will take care of batching, etc., etc. So the way it works is basically you start off with a registration. You just register an endpoint and say, hey, I've got this endpoint and it's interested in these particular commands. And you have an endpoint type, which is important. We'll support different sub-protocols, if you will. Raw being one. And what you can then do is you can post a command to Axon Synapse, and this could be your own command. In this case, it's a wrapped message. You say, oh, this is the name, and there's some properties, and there's the actual payload. And Axon Synapse through Axon Server will route that, and it will actually invoke your service And as you indicated raw, it will just use the payload as the body of the message. So there's no Axon fluff. Sorry to say that. It hurts. But there's no Axon fluff that you have to deal with. And if you want to deal with it, you can have a look at the headers. There's specific headers that will carry the metadata of the messages. In this case, it's a command. If it's an event, you'll have the timestamp in the headers. And this makes it much easier to link any kind of platform, whether it's an Axon framework, if it's Java, if it's .NET, PHP, Cloud Functions, Lambdas, whatever, you can have all the messaging benefits in any environment. So the future, well, we talked quite a bit about the future, but yeah, the future is event-driven, right? I had to link back to that. Event-driven is hard, though, but it's also very powerful. It's very valuable, and I think it's an enabler, right? It enables a lot of business capabilities for a lot of enterprises. But becoming event-driven is a process, not an easy process, and we want to be the ones there for you as you embark on that process. In any way we can assist, that is where we want to be in the future. Thank you.